Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
When Daniel met Olivia, he felt like he was standing in front of someone who shined effortlessly. There was something about her that drew attention, as if the room got brighter every time she walked in. She smiled easily, knew how to entertain any group with her exaggerated stories and dramatic way of speaking. She seemed to have an endless supply of energy. Daniel was the opposite, quiet, reserved, the kind of person who'd rather listen than talk. But maybe that difference was exactly what brought them together. He watched her, fascinated, and she enjoyed being admired by someone so calm. During the first few months, they lived like they were in a well-written, light-hearted movie. She took him to places he'd never have gone on his own. He made her slow down, reminded her of the importance of rest, simple routines, long talks after dinner. Olivia loved planning weekend getaways, suggesting last-minute trips to small towns or trendy big cities. Daniel worried about logistics, money, the practical details she always forgot. What started as a well-rehearsed dance between two different personalities slowly turned into imbalance. They moved in together after 2 years. The apartment was small, but there was enough room for both of them. Olivia took over the living room with her decorating ideas, inspirational quote posters, and plants that never lasted long. Daniel adjusted his habits to fit the new routine, made space in the cabinets, rearranged his schedule for the activities she liked. At first, it felt like love. It felt like care. But over time, he realized he was always adapting, always giving in, always trying not to cause any trouble. Meanwhile, she stayed exactly the same. Marriage came naturally. It was an intimate ceremony, surrounded only by the people who truly mattered to them. That day, Daniel looked at Olivia and was certain he'd made the right choice. She looked beautiful, and he believed that despite their differences, they worked. And they did, for a while. Olivia loved posting pictures of them on trips, smiling with wine glasses or feet in the sand. Daniel smiled in the photos, but carried the weight of keeping that life going, the bills, the commitments, the sacrifices. Over the years, the days got quieter. Her good mood started showing up more around friends than with him. The jokes stopped being funny at home. She went out often for events, motivational talks, work gatherings, while Daniel stayed late at the office, always saying he needed to keep everything in order. Their bedtime conversations turned into monologues or tired grumbles. Sometimes, she didn't even sleep there. She'd say she was at a retreat, a course, something that would transform her energy. Daniel pretended to believe her. Not because he was naive, but because he was exhausted. He'd tried talking, tried creating space for her to say what she really felt. But Olivia always gave vague answers, made jokes to ease the tension, or simply changed the subject. Slowly, he started emotionally detaching. He got used to her absence, the untouched meals in the fridge, the messages left via text instead of face-to-face. The house was full of things, but empty of presence. Intimacy had become convenience. They shared the same space, but lived in different worlds. Despite all this, Daniel believed it was just a phase. Maybe they were both just tired, each lost in their own responsibilities. He held on to the good memories, the days they laughed at silly things, the habit of making faces at each other in traffic. But it had been a long time since any of that happened. Olivia no longer asked about his day. She didn't suggest movies to watch together. When she spoke, it was about the discoveries she made on her solo adventures, new authors, new philosophies, new spiritual practices. Everything seemed new to her, except her own husband. The turning point wasn't a fight, a discovered betrayal, or a scandal. It was something even harsher, the indifference that settled between them. Olivia started treating him like someone too predictable, too settled, unable to keep up with her growth. Daniel, in turn, buried himself in work, came home later and later, and settled for the bare minimum. Sometimes, they'd pass in the hallway without saying a word. Friends who once admired the couple began quietly commenting that something seemed off. But no one really knew what. One night, during a silent dinner, Daniel watched her as she typed on her phone and laughed to herself. He didn't ask who she was talking to, didn't make a comment. He just kept eating. He felt like he'd become a background character in his own life. Was he angry? Sometimes. But most of the time, he just wanted the emptiness to end. The love they once had didn't vanish all at once. It faded like a candle forgotten in a corner. Until all that was left was the smell of smoke. And an uncomfortable certainty that something was coming. Something that would change everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. A simple dinner, prepared almost on autopilot. Daniel had gone to the market, like he did every Tuesday, bought the usual ingredients, and returned home. Olivia was there, sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone. She didn't even look at what he brought. He didn't mention it, just put everything in place, washed his hands, and started cooking. He knew what she liked, the right doneness, the exact seasoning. He still cared, even if it seemed like it no longer mattered to her. During the meal, the silence was the same as on other nights. They chewed slowly, avoiding any attempt at conversation. Daniel had long given up trying to start a topic. Olivia seemed more and more distant, as if she were already living somewhere else. But that night, between bites, with no emotion in her voice, she said, "I'm leaving tonight." She kept her eyes on her phone. The words came out like she was reading a random message. Daniel stared at her for a few seconds but didn't say anything right away. He waited for some kind of explanation, something to show it was a joke or an exaggeration. But she just kept typing. He put his utensils down and stayed seated. He watched every move she made, like someone trying to understand a scene from a movie that didn't make sense. Olivia finally looked up, as if just confirming what she'd said. "Everything's ready. I'm just waiting for a car." That explained her behavior over the past few days. The late-night outings, the suitcases that disappeared and reappeared in the closet, the complete withdrawal even from simple tasks. It hadn't been impulsive. Everything had been carefully planned. The decision had been made a long time ago, but she chose for him to find out in the coldest way possible. Daniel took a deep breath. In another time, maybe he would have begged. Maybe he would have tried to understand, asked why, suggested couples therapy, reminded her of the good times. But he had no energy left to fight. What had kept him going until then was just habit. And when that habit broke with those words, the only thing he felt was relief. The end, finally spoken out loud. It was like a weight had lifted off his shoulders. He replied with a simple, "Okay." He didn't ask where she was going or who she was with. He finished what was on his plate, got up, and put the leftovers away. Olivia left minutes later. She took a rolling suitcase, the car key, and her phone. She didn't look back. No note, no message, no explanation. Silence took her place, stronger than ever. While many would have expected a scandal, Daniel just sat on the couch, opened his laptop, and logged into his banking apps. In minutes, he cancelled the cards under her name, blocked her access to the health plan, and stopped scheduled transfers. He also disabled the data plan linked to his account. All done calmly, without bitterness. This wasn't revenge. It was consistency. Olivia had decided to leave, and she took the connection with her. To Daniel, it made sense that the benefits that came with marriage should also end. After that, he made coffee and went to read. He went to bed early, without feeling the discomfort of someone who'd lost something precious. Because what they had was already lost long before. Now, at least, the end had a name, a date, and a time. And with that, he could reorganize his life. The next few days were surprisingly light. He worked normally, ate out, reclaimed the house as his own space. No more clutter, no strong perfumes in the bedroom, no noises in the middle of the night. For the first time in a long time, the house felt peaceful. When he told a coworker that Olivia had left, the reaction was shock. But Daniel spoke so calmly that the topic quickly faded. He turned down invitations to vent, preferring to keep the feeling of freedom to himself. There was no room inside him for regret. The cycle had closed. And to his surprise, the pain he expected never came. He thought of Olivia sometimes, but without hate or sadness. He thought of her like someone remembering a book they've read, a song that marked a time but lost its charm. He felt more curiosity than longing. He wondered why she chose to leave that way, without an honest conversation. Why she planned everything in silence, like an escape. But he chose not to seek answers. The lack of dialogue in the last months had already made it clear there was no connection left. Daniel moved forward. Careful, methodical, as always. He updated his documents, reset passwords, adjusted the budget. Nothing dramatic. Just necessary. Deep down, he knew Olivia expected a different reaction. Maybe a plea for her to stay, an impulsive gesture, a final effort to save them. But Daniel understood clearly that loving alone is like rowing without water. And he was already exhausted from moving without going anywhere. So when she left, he didn't try to stop her. Because in a way, that was exactly what he needed too, someone to finally put an end to what he'd already started burying in silence. On the morning of the third day after Olivia left, Daniel was sorting emails when the intercom rang. She asked to come up, her voice impatient. He hesitated but let her in. Minutes later, Olivia walked in with her hair messily tied up and an expression somewhere between indignation and urgency. She threw her bag on the couch and crossed her arms. She was clearly angry. She said she needed to talk to him immediately. Daniel stayed calm. He asked if she wanted water or coffee. She refused. She got straight to the point. The night before, she'd gone out to dinner with Julian, a former coworker she'd been talking to regularly for months. During the meal, she asked for the check and, when trying to pay, was surprised when her card was declined. She tried another. Same result. The server waited, her expression shifting from neutral to awkward. Julian had to pay. More than the embarrassment, what hit her was the feeling of helplessness. Until that moment, she believed that even after leaving, she still controlled the situation. She realized then that her world was no longer part of Daniel's. And that hurt her pride. She wanted explanations. She demanded to know why he'd done that. She said it was petty, unnecessary, immature. That his decision had exposed her. That she had plans, commitments, a life built. Daniel listened carefully, without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said that once someone decides to leave, they also take the consequences of that decision. She wanted freedom, now she'd have to pay for it. Olivia refused to accept it. She started yelling that everything he did was calculated. She said he wanted to see her suffer. That he was acting controlling. That he'd always been cold, distant, predictable. Daniel didn't react. He just said she could insult him all she wanted, but no insult would change the fact that she'd left without looking back. That she'd packed in silence, called a ride, planned every step in advance. And from that moment on, he'd choose his own steps too. And he chose not to finance her. That same week, indirect messages started coming. Mutual friends sent texts asking if he was okay, saying Olivia seemed regretful, confused. One even asked him to reactivate her card at least until she got back on her feet. His reply was short, "That's not my responsibility anymore." Days later, Olivia's brother showed up outside the building. He wanted to talk. Said he was there as family, asking Daniel to be more understanding. Claimed she'd left in the heat of the moment, hadn't planned anything with another man, that maybe there was still a chance to reconcile. Daniel listened, but stayed firm. He explained that she stopped being his priority the moment she treated the end like a simple announcement. That until then, he'd covered everything: trips, credit cards, health plan, phone, and now, each should handle their own life. The brother left disappointed. Said Daniel was being too harsh. Daniel just replied that if she wanted a fresh start, she should do it for real. On her own 2 feet. A few days later, messages from Olivia started arriving through money transfer apps. One said, "I need help, it's temporary." Another, "You know I'm still adjusting." The amounts weren't high, but the pattern was the same: requests without conversation, without dialogue, without declared regret. Just the automatic gesture of someone who always assumed someone else would fix things for her. Daniel ignored them. Not out of bitterness, but because he knew exactly what cycle would form if he gave in. If he helped once, she'd come back every time life got tough. The following week, a legal notice arrived. Olivia had hired a lawyer and was demanding financial support. She claimed she'd been dependent on him during the marriage and now needed time to stabilize. The petition asked for temporary alimony, housing assistance, and even reimbursement for expenses she claimed to have covered for shared assets. Daniel wasn't surprised. He'd expected some formal move. And he was ready. He gathered all the bank records from the past years. Showed that her card was supplementary to his account, that the phone was in his name, that the car was bought by him before marriage, that the house was solely in his name. He took all the proof to his lawyer, who prepared a precise response. Stated that the transfers made during the marriage were voluntary, with no contract or obligation. That she had unilaterally abandoned the marital home. And that there were signs Olivia had been in a relationship with someone else before leaving. Daniel's lawyer attached social media screenshots, public chat logs between Olivia and Julian, event check-in dates, and even neighbor statements confirming she'd been frequently absent in the weeks before the separation. The alimony request was quickly dismissed. The judge saw no basis to grant anything beyond the division of a few movable items she still claimed. The rest was archived. Olivia tried to appeal, but her arguments were weak. In court, she looked defeated. Julian didn't show up. Daniel watched everything quietly. He never raised his voice, never responded aggressively, never tried to expose private details. He just let the facts speak for themselves. And they spoke clearly. What was left between them was now just bureaucracy. Emotions no longer played a role. She tried to flip the script, but her coldness at the moment of leaving still echoed too loudly for any reconciliation, legal, emotional, or symbolic. Daniel had already stopped being the man who gave in. And Olivia, for the first time in a long time, had to face reality without the safety net she always assumed would be there. It took another 2 months before Olivia showed up again. She called first, no small talk. Said she was coming to get her things. She wanted everything that was hers. She didn't ask permission. Just informed him. Daniel replied that he'd be home and she could come by, as long as she brought someone with her. He didn't want drama or misunderstandings. It was her right, yes, but he wouldn't let the moment turn into another scene. It was just the final part of a closure already in motion. At the agreed time, Olivia arrived with Julian. She avoided Daniel's gaze, but the other man stared at him, as if to make it clear he was there for her, a new protector. Daniel kept a neutral expression. He'd already sorted everything. The items were packed, labeled, organized into boxes clearly marked with their contents. Clothes, books, personal items, accessories. Nothing beyond what the lawyer had listed as exclusively hers. Things that once represented the intimacy of a couple now seemed like mere cargo. Objects taking up space. Julian looked at the boxes, then back at Daniel, and made a sarcastic comment about how efficient he'd been. Daniel didn't respond at all. He let the lack of reaction be the answer. Olivia seemed uneasy with the silence between them. At another time, that might have sparked an argument. Now, it was just the echo of a relationship that no longer made sense. Julian's presence made everything more theatrical. He made a point of moving around as if protecting Olivia, as if she were a victim returning to a traumatic scene. But the truth was, he was the one most visibly uncomfortable. The awkwardness of being in that house, surrounded by memories that weren't his, with a man who clearly ignored him as if he were invisible. There was no room for conflict. Daniel didn't want Olivia back, and that seemed to be the biggest frustration for the man who'd come trying to prove otherwise. They took the boxes. Nothing was left. The house, once so full of contrasts, now felt clean. Daniel ended that day with the feeling of a task completed. There was no sadness. No immediate relief either. It was a page turned quietly, without dramatic explosion. Days later, he called the realtor and put the property up for sale. It no longer made sense to keep that space. He bought a smaller, well-located, practical apartment. It was the start of a new chapter, without the weight of the past. As he organized his new place, he found out Olivia had gotten a job at a cosmetics store. She'd aimed for a higher position, but without specific qualifications and with an unstable history, she had to accept a customer service role. She was seen a few times at a mall, arranging shelves and demonstrating products. Julian disappeared from her social media. Mutual friends mentioned, without details, that he'd pulled away after the court hearing. Apparently, the relationship fell apart quickly when illusion gave way to reality. Daniel listened from a distance, no longer involved. He didn't wish her harm, but he also had no room inside to feel compassion for someone who'd tried to hurt him. He preferred to look ahead. He reorganized his routine, picked up old hobbies, resumed long walks, enrolled in an online course. He used the free time to rediscover who he was when no one demanded anything from him, when no relationship pressured him to maintain two worlds. For the first time in many years, he didn't need to explain himself. His only obligation was to himself. Close friends noticed the change. There was more lightness in how he spoke, more pause in his decisions. He started going out more, not out of need, but desire. He reconnected with old colleagues, picked up conversations he'd put on hold. At one gathering, someone remarked how different he seemed. Daniel replied that, for the first time, he felt whole. No anxiety, no waiting, no demands that masked neglect. He reflected in silence on how it all happened, without shouting, without obvious betrayals, without public scandals. What destroyed the marriage was indifference, lack of care, absence of reciprocity. It was the silence between two people who stopped seeing each other. Olivia had the chance to keep what they'd built, but chose another path, and that was fine. Daniel just learned to value what couldn't be bought: respect, emotional stability, and the peace of lying down without owing anything to his own conscience. When he signed the sale of the old house, it felt like officially closing a chapter. He walked out to the balcony of his new apartment, watched the city in motion, and smiled. He had less space, fewer belongings, fewer obligations. And yet, he'd never felt so free. He finally understood that true victory wasn't about punishing anyone or proving he was right. It was about starting over with dignity, without needing the other's downfall to rise. Months later, while organizing his files, he found an old video Olivia had saved on an external hard drive. It was from one of their early marriage trips. She was dancing in a local restaurant, and he was watching her with that goofy look of someone who believes love is enough. He watched it to the end, closed the file, and deleted it. That memory belonged to a time that was behind him. Holding onto it would only feed a nostalgia that no longer fit in his new life. That night, before going to bed, he wrote a sentence in a notebook on his nightstand: "When someone decides to leave without looking back, the greatest response you can give is to move forward without needing to be seen." And that's what he did. Because some stories don't need revenge, just a dignified ending. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brandon was used to his monthly work trips. Every first Monday of the month, he'd pack his bag, leave a sweet note for Haley, and head out with his mind focused on what he needed to handle at the company's headquarters, just a few hours away. Their agreement had always been clear: he spent 3 weeks at home and 1 week away, working in person with the team at the other office. Over time, it had become routine. Haley seemed to handle it well, or at least that's what Brandon believed. That week, he left just like always, with the same goodbye kiss, the same promise of "I'll be back before you know it," and the same confident smile he always wore. Haley hugged him, wished him a safe trip, and he left without any idea that things were about to go off track. On the second day of the trip, late in the afternoon, an unexpected storm hit the entire region where the company operated. The servers went down, systems crashed, and within hours, the entire team was sent home until everything could be fixed. The trip that was supposed to last 7 days would end on day 2. Brandon was frustrated by the technical issue, but on the other hand, he saw a rare opportunity. A chance to come home early and surprise her. He got in his car, set the GPS for home, and started thinking about how to make the night special. He stopped by a local winery and bought Haley's favorite bottle of wine. Then, he picked up dinner at a Thai restaurant, the dish she always said she wanted when he came back from a trip. The plan was simple but full of meaning: walk through the front door unannounced, find her watching a show or already in bed, show her he'd come back just for her, just because he wanted to be close. On the drive, he kept imagining her reaction. He pictured her smile, maybe a little shock, followed by a tight hug. He was eager for it. He checked the clock, calculating how much time was left. He'd arrive around 10 p.m., a time when she was usually already settled in. It was perfect. She'd never see it coming. When he reached their street, he parked in front of the gate, turned off the engine, and held the bags with wine and food for a moment. He took a deep breath, trying to hold back his excitement, and turned the key in the front door. What he found was nothing like he expected. The silence was thick, no music, no candle scent, no sign of her at all. The house was completely dark. For a second, he thought she might be asleep. But that bothered him. He left the bags on the kitchen counter and went upstairs to the bedroom. The bed was untouched, pillows in place, no sign anyone had been there. He grabbed his phone and called Haley. Before he could say anything, she answered in a soft voice, saying she'd just laid down. She mentioned it had been a long day, she was tired. Brandon stayed quiet for a few seconds, absorbing every word. He asked if she was in bed, and she confirmed it, casually. Still holding the phone, he looked at the empty bed in front of him and felt the first cut of the night. He wished her good night and hung up. Now, the doubt was unbearable. That phone call had planted something inside him that needed to be settled. With his phone in hand, he opened the car insurance app. The tracker installed in Haley's vehicle showed real-time location. The dot on the map indicated the car was parked just a few blocks away. And it wasn't at a relative's house or a restaurant, it was in front of Kevin's place, his cousin. Brandon's mind started racing. It was impossible not to remember all the family gatherings, the backyard barbecues at their aunt's place, the innocent conversations between Haley and Kevin, the jokes about football, the shared laughs. It had always seemed normal. Nothing had ever stood out to him. But now, everything felt suspicious. Every hug, every joke, every glance. He stood up, grabbed his car keys, and left without saying a word. The GPS address made it clear where her car was. He drove there in silence, trying to hold back the anger growing with every block. When he turned the last corner, he saw Haley's car parked in front of Kevin's house. He parked a little further ahead, far enough not to be seen but close enough to confirm it with his own eyes. There was her car. No mistake. No confusion. The urge to get out and bang on the door was strong, but he held back. He needed to hear her voice one more time. He called. She answered with the same sleepy tone as before, like she was still lying in bed. He asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, she was sleeping, tired. Brandon then said the sentence that would tear down the act, "Funny. I'm home right now, and you're not in our bed." On the other end, complete silence. No excuse, no immediate reaction. Just silence. After a few seconds, she said she forgot to tell him, she was at her sister's place. Brandon closed his eyes. The lie came too easily. He asked her to come home. She said yes, that she was on her way. He thanked her and hung up. But he didn't leave. He stayed in the car, engine off, watching Kevin's house. The lights were on. Her car was parked there, clearly visible. His heart pounded, his blood felt like it was boiling. His mouth was dry, his mind racing. He wanted to understand what was happening, but part of him already knew. What he thought would be a happy surprise was turning into the beginning of a night that would change everything. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Haley rushed out, looking around. Then she stopped. She saw him. He was standing on the sidewalk, staring straight at her. Haley didn't say a word. The color drained from her face, her body trembled. She opened her mouth a few times, like she was searching for something to say, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears, and finally, the first one rolled down. Brandon stayed where he was, staring. He took a deep breath and said firmly, "Get in the car. We're going home." Kevin, behind the curtain, peeked out nervously. Brandon saw him and couldn't hold back. "I'll be back to settle things with you." And just like that, without another word between them, the woman who had sworn eternal love got into the car beside the man who had believed every promise. The silence between them said more than any argument could have. It was the beginning of the end. And Brandon, even if he didn't know it yet, would never be the same again. The drive home was completely silent. Haley stared out the window like it could hide the guilt streaming from her eyes. Brandon kept his hands on the wheel, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying every detail that once seemed normal but now carried a completely different weight. Her easy laughter with Kevin at family parties, the long hugs, the time Haley wanted to be alone during a weekend when he was away. Everything now fit together like pieces of a puzzle he never wanted to solve. As soon as they walked into the house, Brandon dropped his keys on the counter and stood still in the middle of the living room. Haley leaned near the stairs, her face still wet, shoulders shaking. He asked the one thing he needed to know, straight out, was it the first time? Her answer came low, almost a whisper, "No," that hurt more than any scream. Brandon rubbed his face and turned away for a few seconds, like he was searching for strength where there was nothing left. He didn't ask anything else. He walked to the wall and punched the light switch hard, turning on the living room light with force. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was the outburst of someone whose world had just collapsed. Brandon shouted, disorganized, spitting out questions he didn't want answers to. Haley tried to interrupt, saying it wasn't planned, that it started in a confusing way, that she'd been feeling lonely and neglected. Every excuse felt like an insult. Brandon asked if she would have ever told him, if she planned to keep going for months, if they'd ever met inside their own house. She said she'd never do that here, that she respected this space. The irony almost made him laugh. The yelling drew attention. The neighbor across the street, Mr. Thompson, appeared at the door and knocked hard. His voice carried concern. Brandon opened the door with a wild look, expecting a lecture or criticism, but the old man just asked if everything was okay. Brandon said he was dealing with a personal issue and asked him to go back inside. Mr. Thompson, used to the couple's quiet life, found the tone strange and looked past him. He saw Haley, eyes swollen, hugging herself. "Is she okay? Do you want me to call someone?" he asked, genuinely worried. Brandon laughed, but it was a bitter, dry laugh, the kind that comes after total trust has shattered. He answered bluntly, without holding back. "She wants you to call someone? Then call her cousin. Or better yet, call my cousin, Kevin. Because that's who she was with. She was cheating on me with him while telling me she was lying in our bed." The impact was instant. The neighbor froze. Haley's reaction was to lower her head even further. Her face was exposed, and now her reputation was starting to crumble too. Mr. Thompson stammered something like an apology and left without looking back. Brandon slammed the door, but the loudest sound was the silence that followed. Haley, curled up near the railing, started speaking, saying she'd felt neglected, that the weeks apart created distance, that their conversations had faded. Brandon listened quietly for a few seconds, then cut her off. He said that wasn't an excuse. That there were 1,000 ways to deal with marriage problems, and she chose the dirtiest one. He turned away, went into the bedroom, and locked the door. That night didn't end with forgiveness or conversation. It ended with two strangers sleeping under the same roof, carrying different pains, but equally heavy. Brandon stared at the ceiling, while Haley, lying on the living room couch, mentally replayed every choice that led her there. The house looked the same outside, but inside, everything they'd built had already collapsed. Morning came without a word. The sun poured through the windows like the world outside was moving on normally, while inside, the shattered pieces of what was left were still scattered everywhere. Brandon was up before 6. He'd barely slept, his body exhausted, his mind broken. He got up, took a quick shower, changed clothes, and for the first time in a long time, didn't make coffee for both of them. Haley was still lying on the living room couch, as if that was some kind of sign of regret. Brandon walked past her, ignored her red eyes, and went straight to the garage. He came back with 2 suitcases and dropped them by the door. He said only that it was time to leave. Haley asked if they could talk, if there was still a chance to fix things. Brandon didn't respond. He just took the wedding ring off his left hand, placed it on the dresser by the door, and stared at it for a few seconds. She approached, apologized again, said it was a mistake, that she was willing to go to therapy, anything. Brandon kept his face closed. He was decided. There was no going back. She left with the suitcases, and he waited for the door to close before breathing freely again. That house was soaked with her image, with memories of a marriage he defended even through work-related absences. But even empty, that house still had more dignity than any word Haley had spoken the night before. Brandon knew there were still things to settle. And one of them lived just a few blocks away. He got in the car and drove straight to Kevin's house. In his head, flashes of betrayal wouldn't stop. Haley rushing out the front door, the panic on her face, Kevin's cowardly silence behind the curtain. It all played on loop like private torture. When he arrived, he parked and sat for a few minutes staring at the house. He wasn't interested in talking. He'd moved past that. He got out, went to the back, and opened the trunk. He pulled out the axe he used to chop wood in winter. This wasn't impulsive. It had been building since the night before. He walked over to Kevin's old car, a collector's model he always showed off with pride, a 1968 red Mustang, restored piece by piece over years. A personal trophy. Brandon looked at the house one last time. No movement. Not even a curtain shifted. Then he brought the axe down hard on the hood. The first strike dented the metal. The second cracked the windshield. The third opened a gash in the roof. And from there, each blow became a response to every lie, every touch between them, every time Kevin smiled at him like family while sleeping with his wife. Brandon didn't yell, didn't give a speech. He just breathed between strikes, until the tires burst and the side mirror fell. The entire car became a portrait of the rage he couldn't put into words. The front door opened, and Kevin appeared. He was in shorts and an old shirt, barefoot, his face caught between fear and shame. Brandon stood there, axe in sweaty hands, breathing hard. Kevin asked what he was doing. Brandon pointed at the wrecked car and said this was just the beginning of what he deserved. Kevin said he wanted to talk, that things weren't how they seemed, that Haley had reached out first. Brandon laughed, a disbelieving laugh, full of contempt. He threw the axe onto the grass and left without looking back. The police were called, but Brandon was already home when they phoned. He answered calmly, explained why, said he was ready to face the consequences. The officer on the line listened quietly, then said that technically it was a crime against private property, but given the circumstances, it might be treated as a minor offense. Brandon agreed to pay for the damage, no matter the cost. The price he'd pay would be less than what he'd already lost. 2 days later, his lawyer filed for divorce. Haley was notified by email. She replied with a long message full of excuses, old memories, promises of regret. Brandon didn't reply. He just forwarded the document for her signature. The divorce was finalized before the month ended. There was no court hearing. No division of assets. He gave up everything, except his peace. He sold the house the next month and disappeared from the neighborhood without saying goodbye to anyone. He left behind the neighborhood, mutual friends, the street he knew with his eyes closed. It was like that place had ceased to exist. Kevin, meanwhile, became a ghost in his own home. He was ignored at family gatherings, avoided at birthday parties, forgotten at Sunday barbecues. When he tried to reach Haley, she said she didn't want to hear from him. She said he was a mistake too. That she'd fooled herself with a fantasy that turned into a nightmare. Kevin realized too late that, for Haley, he was just the available substitute. There was no love there, only escape. Brandon watched it all from a distance, knowing silence was his greatest victory. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but his decision to move forward, without demanding explanations or offering forgiveness, was what saved his sanity. The ashes of his old life stayed in that neighborhood. The axe went back into the trunk, and slowly, his heart began to rebuild itself, without rush. Because some losses aren't healed by time, but by courage. And courage was the one thing he had most of now. Brandon disappeared from the life he'd built. After the divorce was official, he sold the house without advertising, accepted the first reasonable offer, took the money, and left. He left behind the furniture, the pictures on the walls, the memories of a marriage he thought was solid. He didn't care to take anything except documents, clothes, and the certainty that he'd never step on that street again. He chose a new city where no one knew him, a place where his name wasn't tied to a scandal, where people didn't look at him with pity or curiosity. The move was quick. He found a simple one-story house, far from nosy neighbors. He wanted silence and anonymity. Remote work made the transition easier. The company understood the address change, and for now, he stayed away from business trips. His routine became mechanical: open the laptop, answer emails, close spreadsheets, eat whatever, sleep without knowing what day it was. The energy he once used to maintain a shared life was now used to keep himself from falling into a deeper hole. At first, everything still hurt. Haley's name showed up in dreams. Sometimes he'd see a woman with similar hair at the supermarket and his chest would tighten. Other times, hearing a song on the radio would replay an old scene without warning. But slowly, that presence began to fade. Not because the betrayal stopped mattering, but because he finally understood that holding on to pain only prolonged her power over him. When he realized that, he did something he'd been putting off for weeks. He deleted all the photos, blocked her on social media, removed mutual relatives' contacts. He cut every link that could pull him back. Meanwhile, Haley was left with the weight of her choices. The neighborhood she stayed in for a while became a minefield. Neighbors stopped greeting her. The grocery store she'd shopped at since moving in now felt hostile. Just walking in, she could feel the stares, some direct, some discreet. There were whispers. People talking with disapproval. She tried to pretend it didn't matter, that she could handle it. But the humiliation grew like a stain she could no longer hide. She tried changing her look, buying new clothes, posting old photos like life was going well. But no one believed it. Friends drifted away, relatives avoided calls. Even Kevin vanished. After the car was destroyed, he sold his house, said he needed space, and left without saying where. No goodbye. No messages. Haley realized, in the end, she'd lost everything: her husband, her lover, her home, her friends, her trust. Only silence remained. A silence she'd built herself and now lived in like an invisible prison. She tried to start over, moved to another state, got a new job, rented a small apartment. She spent her days pretending to be busy, like busyness could erase what she'd done. Sometimes she thought about sending Brandon a letter, saying she still regretted it, that she understood the damage. But she always gave up when she opened her phone. What would he do with an apology after everything? She'd already destroyed everything possible. And forgiveness doesn't rebuild homes. Kevin also tasted the bitter consequences. He thought he could move on, that family would eventually forgive, that maybe Haley would become something serious. He learned the hard way that relationships built on lies rarely last. He carried the mark of a traitor within his own family. He wasn't invited to Christmas. His name was removed from group chats. Even his grandmother, who always defended him, said she was disappointed. Nothing he said could erase the image of betrayal. He lived with shame. He moved to a new city to start over, but felt like a stranger everywhere. Brandon, on the other hand, stayed silent. He didn't seek revenge or dig up the past. He was tired of hurting. He chose peace instead. He started walking every day, joined a book club, did small home repairs with his own hands. His life was simple, but light. No one there knew what he'd been through. No one looked at him with pity. He was just a man rebuilding his foundation, calm and steady, like someone who'd survived a storm and was still standing. It was during this time that he realized something he'd never seen before. The love he gave Haley was sincere, but blind. He'd been so focused on keeping the marriage alive that he ignored the signs. He swallowed the distance, the coldness in calls, the ready-made excuses. He blamed himself for not seeing it sooner. But he concluded that trusting wasn't weakness, it was strength. The ability to love fully in a world used to half measures was rare. And even though it cost him dearly, that's what made him different. Time passed. Memories lost their grip. Her name didn't hurt anymore. Anger toward Kevin turned into indifference. The story that almost destroyed everything became just that, a story. A closed chapter. A scar that, though visible, no longer hurt to touch. Brandon wasn't looking for someone new. He didn't want to erase the past with another person. He wanted to understand who he was now. And each day, he discovered there was more inside him than he'd imagined. He realized that losing everything had freed him to start right. The truth hurt, but it freed him from illusion. And in the end, that was worth more than any apology. Because when you lose what you thought was essential and still find peace, it means it was never the other person holding everything up. It was him. It always had been. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Julian had always been proud of who he was. Smart, focused, aware of his limits, but rock solid when it came to character. If there was one thing he stood by, it was staying on a clean path. Coming from a wealthy family, he grew up surrounded by comfort, but early on he decided he didn't want to be just another purposeless heir. In college, he took a job as a bouncer at a nightclub. To many of his classmates, that seemed like a strange choice, but for him, it was a way to prove he could build something on his own. There, between short chats with customers and tense late-night situations, he met Vanessa. She showed up one of those nights when everything felt routine, until it suddenly wasn't. A drunk guy crossed the line with her. Julian stepped in, firm but respectful. No violence. Just presence. Vanessa was struck by how calmly he handled it. The look in her eyes at that moment mixed surprise and relief. They exchanged just a few words, but her name stuck in his head for days. And by coincidence, or maybe fate, they ran into each other again on campus. She was studying business. He was in economics. After that, the conversations came naturally, the dates flowed easily, and their connection grew fast. The relationship quickly turned serious. There was a strong bond. Vanessa was affectionate, fun, always full of ideas about the future. Julian, though more reserved, felt completely at ease around her. It didn't take long for him to believe he'd found the right woman. A year later, they got married in a simple ceremony with close friends and family. His parents were happy, but surprised by how fast things moved. She, on the other hand, seemed determined. She wanted everything to happen right away. The first few months went smoothly. They shared their space in harmony, helped each other with chores, and planned their next steps with excitement. Julian kept working and studying, saving money carefully. He wanted a solid future, and despite his privileged background, he refused to live off his family's money. The resort and the farm were being managed by his father and older brother, but he'd already been invited a few times to take on an administrative role. He declined, explaining he'd only get involved when he was truly ready. To him, success without preparation was just a show. Vanessa said she admired him for that. Over time, small frustrations started to appear. Vanessa began to show discomfort with his old car, the rented apartment far from downtown, and their limited routine. She compared herself to her friends who traveled, posted pictures at luxury hotels, and received expensive gifts. Julian listened, took a deep breath, and patiently explained. He said they were building something bigger, something lasting, and sacrifices were part of the process. He stressed that he didn't want to rely on inheritance or his family's image. He wanted whatever they had to come from their joint effort. And when the right time came, he'd be ready to manage the resort confidently, without having to prove anything to anyone. Vanessa said she understood. At first, she accepted his reasoning. She said she got it. But that understanding seemed weaker every time they talked. She started bringing up more and more how much easier things would be if he'd just ask his father for help. She said they were wasting time living this restricted life. Julian tried to highlight the positives: they were healthy, young, and laying a strong foundation. But his words didn't seem to land. Her impatience started showing in her looks, in long silences, in sharper and sharper comparisons. Julian began to feel pressured. As much as he loved Vanessa, he realized she saw their present as a setback. Some of her comments made him uncomfortable, things like, "Life could be so much better if you weren't so stubborn," or, "if you actually had ambition." He'd think about those words for days. He knew he was giving his all, and still, it never felt like enough. He tried to make up for it however he could. He brought her flowers after work, planned small surprises, organized little weekend trips. Sometimes she responded warmly, other times she'd just say, "thanks," without any energy. What hurt Julian most was seeing her emotionally pull away. The spontaneous affection that used to be constant now felt calculated. Conversations got interrupted by distractions. Her phone rang more often, messages she'd read and quickly delete. He didn't want to become a suspicious guy, but it was impossible to ignore. Her behavior changed subtly but steadily. Her clothes became fancier, her perfumes more expensive, her schedule more unpredictable. When he asked where she'd been, she'd snap back like the question was an insult. And when he said he missed feeling close, she'd fire back by blaming their boring lifestyle. Julian kept telling himself this was just a phase. He believed it was normal for couples to go through ups and downs, and that with patience, things would get back on track. But inside, something had already cracked. The woman he'd fallen for seemed further and further away. It was like she was living at a different pace, in a different world, with different expectations. And no matter how hard he tried, the gap between them kept growing, out of control. The connection that once held them together was now full of noise, pressure, and demands disguised as advice. Up to that point, Julian still believed the marriage could be saved. He still saw in Vanessa the partner he'd imagined building a life with. But the feeling of imbalance grew stronger every day. The sense that, no matter how much he gave, she wanted something he couldn't, or wouldn't, offer. What he didn't know yet was that the signs he'd been ignoring for months were just the beginning of a much harsher truth. And when reality finally hit, it wouldn't ask for permission. Julian started observing more than speaking. Before, he trusted naturally, without a second thought. Now, every little detail became part of an uncomfortable puzzle growing inside him. Vanessa's outings no longer followed any pattern. Random hours, vague excuses, stories that contradicted each other. She said it was a busy time at work, new projects, tight deadlines. But when Julian offered to pick her up or drop her off, she'd quickly refuse, always with some urgent or awkward reason that couldn't be discussed. And the strangest part, for months, she hadn't asked for rides or used ride apps. She claimed she was catching lifts with coworkers. Everything was vague. One night, seeing her bag on the couch, Julian carefully looked through it. He wasn't searching for much, just a receipt, something to confirm or disprove her story from earlier. He found a movie ticket with a date and time that didn't match her work shift. There was also a restaurant napkin with notes. Not proof. Just fragments. But his mind, always logical, had already started piecing together the hidden story. He hesitated for weeks. He tried to talk. Broached indirect topics, watched for reactions, hoping for a voluntary confession. Vanessa dodged every time. Said he was being controlling. Flipped the script fast. Julian started having insomnia. Lost his appetite. Wanted to believe it was all an overreaction, that his mind was sabotaging a marriage that could still be fixed. But deep down, something was screaming clearly. The truth was there, buried under layers of excuses. And if he didn't do something concrete, the doubts would drive him crazy. He decided to act. He bought small voice recorders at an electronics store, simple, discreet devices that could be hidden in everyday objects. He placed one in her bag, another in the car, and a third in the bedroom closet, near where she usually left her phone when changing clothes. He felt guilty. He felt ashamed. But he also felt it was the only way to protect himself. Because the pain of betrayal only becomes worse than the pain of doubt when the doubt can no longer be avoided. For days, he avoided listening to anything. The recorders activated only when they detected sound. When he finally sat down to listen, the confirmation came fast. The first recording was from the car. Vanessa was on the phone, laughing, saying how he believes everything. The name Derek came up early. She said he was getting more insistent, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. Julian froze. He moved to the next recording. Inside the bedroom, she was talking to someone on speakerphone. She mentioned dinner the night before, how funny it was to leave the restaurant and go straight to the apartment. Julian stopped for a few seconds, his stomach turning. Still, he gathered the courage to keep going. The conversations revealed something darker than he'd imagined. Derek wasn't just a casual fling. He treated Vanessa like property. In some parts, he demanded she avoid physical contact with Julian on days they were supposed to meet. In others, he made humiliating jokes about how she lived with her husband. Vanessa laughed. Sometimes she tried to push back, but quickly gave in. The tone of submission, driven by money, gifts, expensive dinners, and empty promises, was clear. Julian listened to everything in silence. He turned off the lights in the bedroom, laid down on the couch and stayed there for hours, eyes open. No shouting. No tears. It was like something inside had shut off. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual, packed his clothes into 2 suitcases. He left a simple note, said he'd heard everything, knew the truth, and preferred to leave without a scene. He placed the note on the kitchen table, collected the recording devices, and kept only digital copies on his personal computer. Before leaving, he looked one last time at the living room where so many plans had been made. Then he locked the door and walked away without looking back. From that moment on, he acted with focus and calm. He found a lawyer. Explained the situation without emotional details. Asked for an immediate divorce, no reconciliation attempts. Said he had evidence and just wanted to handle everything as practically as possible. Vanessa tried calling. Sent messages. Julian ignored them all. On the same day he left the apartment, he was already staying in a hotel room near his parents' house. He didn't tell them yet. He wanted clarity before involving anyone else. In the quiet of the room, he reviewed the audio, organized the evidence chronologically, and created folders with dates, names, transcripts. Each file was a wound, but also a step toward walking away with his head held high. Julian knew the pain would hit hard. He knew that sooner or later, the grief over the relationship's end would come like an avalanche. But at that stage, his priority was protecting his sanity. He didn't want a scandal. But he also wouldn't let it all be swept under the rug. And deep down, he already knew the next step. One that would have consequences far beyond his own marriage. Julian wasn't planning revenge. What he wanted now was justice. He wanted to respond to what had been broken with something stronger than words. After organizing the recordings, he pulled out specific clips and turned them into smaller files. At first, he kept this as legal protection. But as he reviewed everything more calmly, he realized one piece was missing, someone who deserved to know the truth just as much as he did, Derek's wife. Madison Holloway was known in social circles for her discretion. Polite, influential, from a respected family. The public image of the Holloway couple was flawless: charity events, controlled appearances, rehearsed speeches about family, loyalty, and values. Julian didn't know her personally, but a quick search brought up her social media profiles, her connection to the family business, and the number of the law firm where she worked. He wrote it all down in silence. For 2 days, he wrote and rewrote the content of an anonymous letter. He didn't want drama. He wanted facts, clear, straightforward. He attached the message to a USB drive with the most relevant audio clips and a folder of chronologically organized photos. In every detail, Julian was meticulous. He included times, dates, locations, conversation snippets. No judgments. Just evidence. When it was ready, he put everything in a plain brown envelope and sent it to Madison's office address. No return address. No warning. The next afternoon, he got a notification that the package had been delivered and received in person. Julian knew that from that moment on, he no longer had control. But he also felt a strange relief. Like he'd lifted a weight off his shoulders, even if it still existed, it was now shared with someone who had every right to know. What happened next came like a public avalanche. When Madison received the envelope, she went straight to the point. She called her husband and demanded he come home. Confronted him with the evidence. Derek, shocked, tried to deflect, then downplay it. Laughed. Said it was all fake, that someone was trying to ruin his reputation. She responded with a firm look and a silence that, according to close accounts, unsettled him more than any shouting ever could. The next day, Madison did something that even her friends didn't expect. She brought the scandal into the workplace. At the company's board meeting, in front of Derek's father, she presented the material she'd received, the audio files. Without changing her tone, she revealed that the corporate apartment had been used for intimate meetings with a married employee. She reported that company resources had been used to pay for dinners, trips, gifts, all to support the affair of the owner's son. And she ended with a direct line, "Either you take action, or I make this public." The impact was immediate. Derek's father, Victor Holloway, a man with a strict reputation and an unblemished business history, was stunned. This could destroy contracts, sponsorships, partnerships. More than personal shame, it was a threat to the empire he'd spent decades building. The decision came fast. Derek was formally fired, lost access to the apartment and corporate card, and was removed from all roles with a strict internal memo signed by the board. The termination was labeled "serious breach of trust." When the news reached corporate gossip outlets, blogs, business magazine columns, private groups, Derek's reputation collapsed. The man once seen as the clear heir to one of the state's biggest companies was now cited as an example of irresponsibility and abuse of power. Vanessa, meanwhile, also lost ground. Colleagues pulled away. Invitations dried up. Her social media turned into a minefield of subtle but cutting hints and comments. She tried to keep up appearances, but couldn't maintain the image of a strong, independent woman when everyone knew exactly what had happened. Julian learned all of this without lifting a finger. Mutual friends passed along the updates, curious about his reaction. He just listened and thanked them. No sarcasm. No satisfaction. Just listened and kept living. For him, Derek's downfall wasn't something to celebrate. It was simply the logical result of choices that, sooner or later, demand payment. Julian kept working, focused, quietly rebuilding himself. The past was collapsing without him having to push a single piece. Because the truth, even if it takes time, always finds a way to surface. And when it does, the damage is inevitable. Vanessa spent days locked in her house after everything came out. The messages she got were short, cold, some angry, others pitying. Co-workers who used to compete for lunch with her now pretended not to see her. Invitations vanished. Glances on the street became uncomfortable. She became the woman who brought down a name, stained a family, and lost a marriage to a respected man. Julian's silence disturbed her more than any insult. No messages. No attempts to reach out. It was like he'd erased her from his life as easily as she used to delete incriminating messages from her phone. Then came the dizziness, morning sickness, sudden hunger followed by nausea. At first, she thought it was stress. Then maybe a virus. But when the symptoms continued for weeks, she bought a test. She hoped it would be negative, just another physical symptom of the emotional chaos she was going through. But 2 lines appeared on the screen. She froze, staring at the result as if it were punishment. Then she left the test on the sink and lay down. She slept with her head spinning. When she woke up, the reality was still there. She tried to hide the pregnancy as long as she could. Avoided going out. Wore loose clothes. Told acquaintances she had hormonal issues. Avoided any exams or doctor visits. She wanted time. She tried to figure out how this had happened, how she'd let such an obvious consequence slip through the choices she'd been making. She thought about reaching out to Julian, but ruled it out. She knew he wouldn't believe her. She considered going to Derek's family, but didn't have the courage. They'd all erased her. Only Derek was left, and she knew he wouldn't welcome the news. Still, she sent a message. Straight to the point. Said she was pregnant, had taken the test multiple times, and given the circumstances, he was the father. The reply came hours later. Short. Cold. You just want money. Leave me out of this. She pushed back. Called. Sent photos of the results. The next reply was harsher. Figure it out yourself. This has nothing to do with me. With no emotional, financial, or family support, Vanessa faced the pregnancy with a mix of wounded pride and silent anger. In the first months, she had breakdowns alone in the bathroom, threw up often, lost sleep, but refused any outside help. She told herself she could handle it, that she was strong, that she didn't need anyone, but inside, she was afraid of everything: childbirth, the future, loneliness. In the last months, exhaustion replaced anger. She avoided mirrors, spoke less, ate out of obligation. Every ultrasound was a painful reminder that this child was part of a story she wished she could erase. Still, she went through with it. She completed each stage of the pregnancy like someone serving a silent sentence. Afraid of exposing her situation further, Vanessa sought legal advice. When the baby was born, she filed a case. The judge ordered a DNA test. Derek tried to delay it, argued against it, but the result was undeniable. Full genetic match. The court's decision came days later: paternity recognized, child support required. He appealed, but lost at every level. At the same time, his already damaged image sank even deeper. Now, beyond being a cheater, he was seen as an unwilling father, someone trying to escape responsibility for a child. The few connections he had left disappeared. He had to sell his luxury car, then his apartment. Moved to another city. Looked for work outside the circles where his name still brought shame. He became invisible, far from the arrogance he showed at dinners and the promises he made while destroying someone else's marriage. Vanessa, alone, faced motherhood with resentment. There were no excited posts, no celebration photos. She raised her daughter with emotional distance. The shine she'd chased in trips, parties, and luxury now amounted to a crib in the corner of the room and sleepless nights. Friends vanished, her career stalled, old dreams lost their meaning. She lived on basics, barely covering bills, surviving on child support that barely covered essentials. She avoided thinking about the days she judged Julian for being too simple. Now, she'd trade it all for just a bit of the peace he seemed to have found again. Julian, on the other hand, moved forward almost silently. He relocated shortly after the divorce, invited by his brother, and began helping manage the family farm. There, he found a kind of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He worked hard, learned every detail of the business, and over time earned respect from everyone around him. He quit social media, cut ties with people who brought unnecessary noise, and refocused on his personal growth. He rebuilt his routine, formed new habits, met new people, but always carefully. The trauma was still too fresh to give his heart away easily. When asked about Vanessa, he'd simply say their paths had diverged, and life had taught him in the hardest, but clearest way possible. Some resort employees talked about Derek's downfall like it was public gossip. Julian just listened, staying out of it. He knew that outcome didn't make him better, just free. Over time, he met someone new, a woman who came without big promises. They had calm conversations, laughed at simple things. There was no rush, no pressure about material success. She worked at a local business, lived with her mom, and helped care for 2 nephews in her free time. Julian approached slowly, not making plans, but feeling with each talk that there was something here his body didn't reject, his mind didn't sabotage, and his heart recognized as possible. One weekend, during a low-key outing, she asked if he believed in fresh starts. Julian looked at her and said, "Real new beginnings don't start when everything gets better, but when you finally understand what you deserve." And in that moment, he knew he deserved something light, honest, and mutual. What Julian went through wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was an inner rebirth. He didn't need to take revenge, humiliate, or respond with hate. He chose truth, even if it meant losing someone he once loved. And in that choice, he found his own peace. Vanessa carried the wreckage she'd built. Derek vanished under the weight of consequences. But Julian walked towards something no money or status could buy, a life where he could sleep soundly and wake up without carrying doubts, lies, or pretense. Because there are pains we don't choose to feel. But there's dignity we choose to keep. And that, no one can ever take away. Not ever. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.